The Supreme Court chamber fell into a heavy silence, the kind that presses down on every breath and makes the air itself feel like it is waiting. All eyes turned toward Justice Samuel Alito as he leaned forward, his black robe flowing like a shadow across the polished bench. His smirk was sharp, a signal of confidence built over decades of watching opponents stumble into his carefully laid traps. In his gaze was not curiosity but certainty. Certainty that this day, this hearing, this young Congresswoman standing before him, would be no different. Across the chamber, Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stood steady at the podium, her emerald suit a bold flare against the somber wood. Her expression did not bend to the weight of the room. She adjusted the microphone with the calm of someone who had walked through harder storms, her eyes locked with his, refusing to yield. The tension was electric, felt by senators, reporters, and citizens watching from afar. Alito cleared his throat and began, his words dripping with condescension. "Congresswoman, you seem to lack a basic understanding of constitutional principles." A ripple of murmurs spread through the crowd. Cameras flashed, capturing the moment as though history itself was bracing for impact. It was supposed to be routine, another exhibition of judicial dominance. But the air betrayed him. There was something different in Crockett's silence, a stillness that spoke of preparation, a certainty that rivaled his own. Then came the hook, not in her words, not yet, but in her resolve. She was not here to be trapped. She was here to flip the very stage he believed belonged only to him. What happened next left the courtroom and the nation speechless. Trust in the Supreme Court had fallen to historic lows. For years, the nation's highest bench, once seen as the guardian of justice above politics, had been shaken by scandal after scandal. Reports of undisclosed luxury trips, hidden financial ties, and partisan decisions had chipped away at the public's faith. For everyday Americans, it felt as though the robes that were meant to symbolize impartiality had become armor for unchecked power. People whispered about corruption, not as a theory, but as a creeping reality. The very institution that was supposed to stand above the storm now looked drenched in it. This was the backdrop against which Justice Alito tried to corner Jasmine Crockett. It was not just a clash of personalities. It was a confrontation that carried the weight of the nation's disillusionment. Alito represented the entrenched power of the old order, cloaked in prestige, convinced that dignity flowed only one way, downward, from judge to citizen. Crockett represented something different, a voice rising from the ground up, shaped not by Ivy League walls, but by the lived struggles of real communities. Her presence at that podium was more than symbolic. It was a challenge to the idea that power answers to no one. The stakes stretched far beyond the four walls of that chamber. If Crockett faltered, it would confirm the suspicion that no one could break through the iron curtain of judicial authority. But if she stood her ground, if she turned Alito's arrogance back on him, it would mark a seismic moment, proof that even the most insulated figures of power could be questioned, exposed, and held accountable. Viewers watching from their homes could sense it. This was not only about travel disclosures or ethics filings. It was about whether truth still had the strength to face arrogance and win. It was about whether America could still believe in the principle that no one, not even a Supreme Court justice, is beyond accountability. And while Alito thought he was scripting another easy takedown, Jasmine Crockett was preparing to write a chapter that would echo far beyond this room. What she was about to unleash would change how justice is faced. Congress forever. Samuel Alito had spent decades perfecting a reputation as the court's most relentless interrogator. To his allies, he was brilliant, sharp, and uncompromising. To those who faced him, he was a master of intellectual entrapment, a judge who spoke less like a guardian of justice and more like a prosecutor with an agenda. His technique was always the same: lure his target into a narrow corner. then spring a trap so precise it left even seasoned attorneys stumbling for words. For years, this style had been celebrated in conservative circles as proof of his genius. But to millions of Americans, it felt less like brilliance and more like arrogance sharpened into a weapon. Alito's story was wrapped in the prestige of institutions that had elevated him. Princeton polished his early confidence, Yale Law gave him a stage, and the Bush White House delivered him the ultimate prize, a seat on the highest court in the land. He carried these credentials like armor, wielding them not as tools of service, but as evidence of superiority. Every robe he donned, every bench he sat upon, reinforced his belief that he was untouchable beyond reproach, beyond the rules that governed everyone else. Yet beneath that veneer of authority lay contradictions that cut deep. He often spoke about the sanctity of judicial independence. Yet his public gestures betrayed political leanings, from dismissive reactions during presidential addresses to speeches that echoed partisan talking points. He railed against congressional oversight, calling it political interference, even as reports surfaced of his undisclosed connections to powerful donors and ideological groups. The very man who scolded others for undermining the Constitution was, in the eyes of many, undermining its spirit by protecting privilege over accountability. His rulings reflected the same pattern. On issues of reproductive rights, voting access, and corporate influence, his decisions consistently tilted toward consolidating power rather than dispersing it. To progressives, immigrants, and marginalized communities, Alito became a symbol of a court that seemed more interested in guarding the interests of the elite than in defending the vulnerable. He had become the embodiment of what so many feared, a justice who mistook his lifetime appointment for a lifetime of unchecked authority. And yet, his arrogance was his blind spot. He had grown so accustomed to deference, so used to witnesses folding under his pressure, that he assumed the pattern would never change. He believed his intellect was an impenetrable shield, and his smirk a seal of victory before the fight had even begun. To him, Jasmine Crockett was not a threat, but a rookie to be lectured, a congresswoman to be humbled under the weight of his carefully worded hypotheticals. What he did not see, what he could not imagine, was that his own history of contradictions had armed her with everything she needed. Every smug remark, every overlooked disclosure, every ruling that revealed his bias was about to be turned back on him. The trap he thought he was setting was, in truth, already waiting for him. Jasmine Crockett's story did not begin in the marble halls of Washington. It began in communities where justice often felt like a promise broken, where families faced the system with fear rather than faith. Raised in Texas, she saw firsthand how working people were dismissed, how immigrants and minorities were silenced, and how power tilted away from those who needed it most. These experiences did not harden her. They forged in her a determination to step into the very arenas that had failed so many and demand better. Before Congress, she was a criminal defense attorney. In crowded courtrooms, she defended clients who were outnumbered, outspent, and often presumed guilty before they spoke a word. Those years carved resilience into her character. She learned how to face down prosecutors who towered with confidence, how to steady clients whose lives hung on fragile testimony, and how to argue against odds that seemed immovable. Every case was a reminder that silence favors the powerful, and speaking truth, even if your voice shakes, is the only way to break through. Her rise to Congress was not paved by privilege, but by persistence. In the Texas legislature, she fought battles that others avoided, challenging corporations that poured money into politics, pressing for voting rights when restrictions threatened to silence communities of color, and refusing to shrink under the glare of opponents who underestimated her. To her critics, she was too fiery, too direct, too unwilling to play by the quiet rules of political etiquette. To her supporters, she was exactly what they had been waiting for, a representative unafraid to confront injustice wherever it stood, That history followed her into Washington. On Capitol Hill, she quickly gained a reputation for sharp questioning that could unravel the polished facades of CEOs and officials who thought they could bluff their way past accountability. She did not come with the pedigree of Ivy League schools or the safety net of powerful donors, but she came with something more dangerous to the complacent: preparation, conviction, and a refusal to back down. And that is what she carried into the Supreme Court chamber on the day of her showdown with Justice Alito. To the outside world, it looked like an unfair match. A seasoned justice with decades of authority against a freshman lawmaker barely a year into her term. But to Jasmine Crockett, this was not unfamiliar ground. She had stared down power before. She had won before. She knew arrogance when she saw it, and she knew how to dismantle it. What Alito did not understand was that Crockett had not come empty-handed. Her calm demeanor, her steady gaze, were not just signs of courage. They were signs of preparation. She had done her homework, traced his contradictions, gathered proof of every unspoken hypocrisy. What Alito didn't know: Crockett had brought receipts. The opening moments of the exchange carried a deceptive politeness, the kind that hides a knife beneath a smile. Justice Alito leaned forward, his voice measured, almost warm. "Congresswoman Crockett, welcome to the Supreme Court. I understand you have concerns about our ethical standards." It sounded cordial. But those who knew his style recognized the setup. This was the moment where he drew his opponent closer, only to spring the trap. Crockett thanked him with equal formality, her tone respectful yet steady. "Justice Alito, I appreciate the opportunity to discuss these important matters. The American people deserve transparency from all branches of government." She spoke with the calm rhythm of someone unshaken, someone who understood that even the opening lines were part of the battle. Alito's eyes narrowed. His smirk returned. "Transparency is indeed important," he said, his voice tightening. "But would you agree that the Constitution establishes the court's independence precisely to shield it from political pressure? Or do you believe Congress should control the judiciary?" The question was designed as a trap. If she agreed, she would undermine her argument. If she disagreed, she would look ignorant of the Constitution itself. The chamber tensed. But Crockett did not flinch. "Justice Alito, I would not frame it that way," she replied smoothly. "The Constitution establishes checks and balances between branches, not isolation. Congressional oversight is part of that system, not an infringement upon it." Alito blinked, briefly caught off guard by her precision. He pressed harder. "Let me be more specific. You've suggested justices should disclose private travel. Would you apply the same standard to congressional members?" "Absolutely," Crockett answered without hesitation. "I have publicly disclosed every trip since taking office. The question is why members of this court have not done the same." A low murmur rippled through the audience. Alito's expression tightened. The cracks were showing. His questions grew sharper, almost desperate. "Perhaps you are unaware of the security concerns justices face daily. These disclosures could put our lives at risk. Is that what you want?" Crockett's reply cut through the tension like glass. "With respect, Justice Alito, members of Congress face similar threats. Yet we manage disclosure while maintaining security. Are you suggesting those same protocols cannot protect justices?" The silence that followed was heavy. For the first time, Alito looked unsettled. His smirk faltered, his tone strained, and then she pulled out the evidence that would turn the chamber upside down. Asterisk. The tension in the chamber reached its breaking point when Jasmine Crockett calmly reached into the folder before her. For a moment, the entire courtroom leaned in, uncertain of what she would produce. Justice Alito adjusted his glasses, ready to pounce again with another hypothetical. But the Congresswoman was no longer playing defense. She was about to flip the script. "Justice Alito," she began, her voice steady and deliberate. "You've spoken often about the dangers of congressional oversight, warning that it would compromise judicial independence. Yet in 2010, you attended events where donations were openly solicited while you were listed as a special guest. Would you like to see the evidence?" Her aide handed her a tablet. On its screen glowed photographs from the Heritage Foundation dinner, Alito's name boldly printed on the program. She held it high enough for the cameras to capture. Gasps echoed through the chamber. Reporters' fingers flew across keyboards. Alito's smirk faltered. His voice, once confident, now carried a sharper edge. "That is a mischaracterization of private events I attended years ago," he snapped, his tone cutting but defensive. Crockett did not blink. "With respect, Justice, these were not private events. They were advertised as fundraisers, complete with donation levels. I have here 3 separate invitations from subsequent years, all listing you as keynote speaker. Each explicitly mentioned contributions. Would you like to see those as well?" The murmurs grew louder. Even some of Alito's colleagues shifted uneasily in their seats. Crockett placed printed copies of the invitations on the podium. Her movements calm and precise, like a surgeon dissecting a tumor. Alito's voice hardened. "Congresswoman, you misunderstand the difference between educational events and political fundraising. This is exactly why Congress has no place meddling in judicial affairs. You lack the context." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Everyone recognized it as a dismissal of her intelligence. But Crockett, unshaken, let the silence work for her before responding. "Justice Alito, I did not attend Harvard or Yale, but I did graduate from law school. I passed the bar, and I won cases before the Texas Supreme Court. I know what constitutes a fundraiser. My question is, do you?" The audience erupted. Roberts banged his gavel, but the force of the moment could not be contained. Cameras caught Alito's face as the color drained, the mask of superiority cracking under the weight of her words. He tried to recover, turning to one of his favorite weapons, the impossible hypothetical. "Congresswoman," he said, voice tightening, "if a justice unknowingly attends an event where donations are solicited, is that an ethical violation? How could one possibly prevent that?" It was a familiar move, one he had used to dismantle lawyers countless times. But Crockett was ready. "That's an interesting scenario," she replied smoothly. "But we're not discussing hypotheticals today. We're discussing documented events where you were advertised as the guest of honor at fundraisers, events you attended repeatedly after." Being made aware of their nature, she lifted another document. "These are not assumptions. They are records." Gasps rippled again. The smirk was gone now, replaced by a clenched jaw. Crockett pressed on. "Justice Alito, you've insisted that oversight threatens judicial independence. Yet you failed to recuse yourself from cases involving companies in which you owned stock. In Chevron v. NRDC, you participated despite holding Chevron shares. Would you care to explain?" The chamber froze. Even Chief Justice Roberts looked startled. Alito stammered, "Those were managed accounts." "I was not directly aware." Crockett leaned forward. "A managed account you were legally required to monitor. And this was not an isolated incident. I have documentation of at least 7 similar cases." The silence was suffocating. Crockett then revealed one final piece, a split-screen projection showing Alito's public opinion on ethics reform beside nearly identical passages from a conservative legal group's brief. Your words, Justice Alito, or theirs. He sputtered, outraged. "This is outrageous. Baseless." Her reply was quiet, but it carried across the chamber. "These are public records. The American people have a right to know. For the first time in decades, Samuel Alito was not the one in control." The courtroom had witnessed a reversal so stunning it felt biblical. David had not only stood against Goliath, she had struck the giant where he was weakest. But the real shock came after the recess. When the fallout began, the hearing broke for recess. But outside those chamber doors, the world was already on fire. Within minutes, clips of Jasmine Crockett dismantling Justice Alito had flooded social media. The moment she asked, "Do you understand what a fundraiser is, Justice?" ricocheted across platforms, racking up millions of views before she even left her seat. Hashtags like #Crockett Receipts and #Alito Exposed trended at the top of Twitter. On TikTok, creators stitched her takedown with captions calling her the people's prosecutor, while memes compared Alito's smug opening expression to his pale, speechless stare at the end. Cable news scrambled to keep up. CNN plastered the headline, "Supreme Showdown. Crockett stuns Alito," with legal analysts marveling at her preparation. MSNBC called it a turning point in judicial accountability. On Fox News, the spin was swift, framing her as a radical overstepping her role. But even there, some commentators admitted the evidence she revealed was damning. The divide was stark, yet unmistakable. No one could deny that the confrontation had shaken the image of invincibility surrounding the court in law schools and universities. Professors dissected the clash in real time. Some called it the most significant public challenge to judicial power since Watergate. Journalists who had covered the court for decades admitted they had never seen a justice fact-checked so thoroughly in real time. And in living rooms across America, people who had long felt ignored by the system felt something different, stir a sense that truth, when delivered with courage, still had the power to cut through the armor of privilege. The ripple effect was impossible to contain. Politicians from both parties were forced to comment, some rushing to defend Alito, others cautiously acknowledging that new ethics standards were needed. Ordinary citizens flooded Crockett's office with messages of support, thanking her for speaking the words they had been waiting to hear. For the progressive audience watching online, the validation was electric. This was proof that arrogance could be pierced, that facts could prevail, that dignity could triumph even in the most unequal of battles. And yet, this was only the beginning. The fallout was still unfolding, and the shock that awaited after the recess would prove even more explosive. When the chamber reconvened, the energy had shifted. What began as a stage for Justice Alito's dominance had transformed into something larger, something that belonged not to one justice or one congresswoman, but to the American people. Jasmine Crockett, standing at the same podium where so many had been humbled before, spoke with a clarity that cut through centuries of deference. She was not just defending herself against Alito's barbs. She was reminding the nation of a simple truth. Power must answer to the people. Her words reframed the confrontation. "Accountability is not an attack," she said, her voice steady. "It is the foundation of democracy. No one is above the Constitution, not members of Congress, not the President, not even the justices of the Supreme Court." The gallery listened in silence, struck by the audacity and the simplicity of her message. What had looked like arrogance from the bench now appeared as fragility. Exposed by facts and by courage, for those watching at home, the meaning stretched beyond politics. It spoke to anyone who had ever been told to stay silent, anyone who had been underestimated because of where they came from, how they spoke, or what they looked like. Crockett's strength was not just in her preparation, but in her refusal to shrink in the face of authority. Her calm defiance became a mirror for the country, proof that persistence, dignity, and truth still matter, even in a time when cynicism often feels easier than hope. In that moment, the fight between Crockett and Alito ceased to be about two individuals. It became a story of resilience versus arrogance, of democracy versus entitlement. She didn't just defend herself. She defended the people, and outside those marble walls. A question lingered in the air: if one Congresswoman could bring the nation's most powerful judge to account, what might happen if more voices found the same courage? The answer was waiting, just beyond the horizon. Asterisk. Justice Alito tried to trap Jasmine Crockett with the weight of his title and the sharpness of his hypotheticals. But instead of stumbling, she flipped the entire trial. What was meant to be her humiliation became his unraveling, and in that reversal, the nation witnessed something unforgettable: dignity outlasting arrogance, truth cutting through power. This is the story that matters most in our time, that no institution, no robe, no title stands above accountability. Crockett's calm defiance did more than expose contradictions. It reminded us that courage can pierce even the thickest armor of privilege, and that when someone dares to speak for the people, even the highest walls of power can shake. That is why moments like these cannot be left to fade. They must be shared, remembered, and carried forward. If you believe justice belongs to everyone, not just the powerful, make sure you subscribe, share this story, and leave your voice in the comments. Because together we turn outrage into action, and action into change. And if you thought this showdown was intense, wait until you see what's coming next. The fight for accountability is far from over.